70% of Americans are saying, "Not in my backyard," to data centers. And yet, power companies are quietly using eminent domain to seize private land for these facilities. This isn't just about a new substation anymore. We're seeing a shocking shift in property rights playing out across the country in 2026, where the insatiable demand for AI compute is fundamentally changing who owns what. The sheer scale of this land grab, driven by companies like Dominion Energy and Georgia Power, is revealing the true, hidden cost of the AI boom, and it's hitting property owners directly. How did we get here? And what exactly gives a power company the right to take your land for someone else's servers? We're going to dig into the legal precedents, the money flows, and the real-world impact. And stick with me, because the last part of this is the piece almost everyone gets wrong, and it's the part that decides whether you win or lose here. Here's something you won't hear much about in the headlines. Your local power company is about to become one of the biggest real estate players in your county. In 2023 alone, power companies filed over 1,000 eminent domain actions nationwide, not just for new transmission lines, but increasingly for the land underneath massive data center campuses. This isn't a theoretical future. It's happening right now, quietly reshaping property rights in the age of AI. Consider this. Even as 70% of Americans voice opposition to data centers near their homes, utility giants are leveraging century-old eminent domain laws to seize private property, often citing public good for energy infrastructure. But the public good they're serving isn't just your household electricity. It's the insatiable power demands of hyperscale computing facilities. These aren't isolated incidents. We're talking about a coordinated strategy by entities like Dominion Energy, Duke, and Pacific Corp, all racing to secure prime locations for what's effectively a new industrial revolution. The ripple effects stretch from rural farmlands now facing forced sales to the local tax bases grappling with the sudden arrival of these high-power users. What's truly happening here is a fundamental redefinition of private property, all in the name of the AI boom. What if I told you the internet, the thing you're watching this video on, is fundamentally physical, hidden in plain sight, and growing at an exponential, land-hungry rate? While we often think of the internet as this ethereal cloud, it's actually a vast, interconnected network of massive buildings. Data centers. These facilities are the lungs of the internet, silently processing every Google search, every Netflix stream, every TikTok scroll, and increasingly, every AI query. In fact, the demand is staggering. Analysts at JLL estimate the global data center market could reach $324 billion by 2030, driven largely by the insatiable appetite of AI. Companies like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud are building campuses the size of small towns. Consider Northern Virginia, which has been dubbed Data Center Alley. It currently hosts over 300 data centers, consuming 20% of the region's entire electricity supply. It's a scale that the average person rarely, if ever, considers. Despite their essential role, public awareness of these facilities' physical footprint and colossal resource consumption, especially electricity and land, is critically low. A recent poll showed 70% of Americans are opposed to new data centers in their communities, even as the demand for their services explodes. This creates a fascinating tension. We all rely on them, but few want them next door. And this brings us to the core of the issue. Why, in the face of this widespread opposition, are power companies able to seize private land for these invisible giants? Why are power companies using eminent domain to take land for data centers, when over 70% of Americans oppose new data centers in their community? This is the core tension here. Eminent domain, fundamentally, is the government's power to take private property for public use, even if the owner doesn't want to sell. It's historically been used for roads, schools, or public utilities like power lines. But here's the critical twist. That public use is being stretched. In jurisdictions across the country, power companies, not the tech giants themselves, are becoming the primary actors in acquiring land, and they're explicitly leveraging eminent domain for profit data center projects. We're seeing cases like Dominion Energy in Virginia, where residents received notices that their land was needed, not for a new power substation to serve existing homes, but for the expansion of a data center campus owned by a private corporation. Think about that. A private company, through the intermediary of a power utility, can force you to sell your land because their business needs electricity. It's a legal maneuver that essentially privatizes the public utility of eminent domain. This isn't just about transmission lines anymore. It's about the land underneath the very buildings that house the servers. What this teaches us is that the definition of public use is becoming remarkably fluid. And that fluidity raises a fascinating question. How exactly do communities respond when their land is targeted, despite that staggering 70% opposition you're not supposed to know about? Here's the staggering statistic you're not hearing from your local government or your utility provider. Fully 70% of Americans actively oppose the presence of new data centers in their communities. This isn't just a slight preference. It's a not in my backyard, NIMBY, sentiment so pervasive it's become the dominant public response. When Aaron Walliat published his deep dive into this issue on July 19th, citing surveys from organizations like the Pew Research Center, he highlighted a stark disconnect between public opinion and corporate action. People are concerned, and for good reason. These facilities are massive, often sprawling across hundreds of acres. They're loud, often humming 24/7 with the drone of cooling systems, sometimes registering decibel levels comparable to busy highways. Their environmental footprint, particularly around water usage for cooling, can be enormous, with some facilities consuming over 3 million gallons daily, a statistic brought to light by investigations into areas like Mesa, Arizona. Think about a community like Loudoun County, Virginia, which is home to the largest concentration of data centers globally, boasting over 100 operational facilities. Residents there, particularly in areas like Ashburn and Sterling, are seeing their quiet agricultural land transform into industrial parks, fundamentally altering the character and infrastructure demands of their towns. So, on one hand, you have overwhelming public disapproval. On the other, you have power companies leveraging government authority to seize private land for these very facilities, often through eminent domain proceedings. It's a direct collision, and it begs a critical question. How is this happening when public sentiment is so clearly against it? This aggressive land acquisition, despite the widespread opposition and local protests, reveals a deeper game at play. The real estate market for these digital behemoths is fundamentally changing, and it's leading to what I'm calling the hidden land grab of 2026 explained. But what if the real land grab isn't by big tech companies directly, but by the utilities that power them? This is the core of what Aaron Walliat unpacked in his July 19th article, Eminent Domain for Data Centers, the hidden land grab of 2026. He illuminates how utility companies, often seen as benign public servants, are leveraging their unique status as essential service providers to become de facto real estate developers for massive data center campuses. Think about it. Private companies typically can't just force you to sell your land, but power companies? They can, under eminent domain, which historically has been reserved for public infrastructure like roads or power lines. Walliat's reporting reveals this isn't just about stringing up new cables. It's about acquiring hundreds of acres for substations and the surrounding land needed for these sprawling digital factories. A concrete example Walliat highlights is Dominion Energy in Virginia, which has been particularly aggressive in securing land for data center development. They're not just providing power, they're enabling a complete ecosystem, sometimes against fierce local opposition. This gives them an almost insurmountable advantage, essentially turning them into an arm of the tech industry, bypassing the usual market friction of land acquisition. It's a strategic move, often hidden from public scrutiny, with 2026 hinted at as a critical inflection point for these acquisitions. What this teaches us is that the infrastructure supporting the digital world is far more physically invasive and politically complex than most realize. What happens when your property is next? What if the precedent being set by power companies right now means your property could be next, even if you're nowhere near a data center? This isn't just about rural communities anymore. If utility companies can successfully argue that powering a data center is a public use, justifying eminent domain, where does it stop? Imagine the implications. If an Amazon warehouse or a Google campus could be deemed public use because it provides jobs or digital infrastructure, the legal floodgates could open. This is the chilling scenario Aaron Walliat paints, where the definition of public use expands to include almost any large-scale private enterprise that promises economic benefit, eroding the fundamental protections of private property rights. For instance, we're already seeing this tension play out in places like Loudoun County, Virginia, where agricultural land, once the backbone of local economies, is being aggressively targeted. Farmers who've held their land for generations are being pressured, and sometimes forced, to sell. The long-term consequence isn't just the loss of individual homes, but the systematic industrialization of landscapes and communities that were never designed for it. This is the hidden land grab that Walliat highlighted on July 19th. The only recourse for citizens is often through understanding local zoning laws, community organizing, and advocating for clearer eminent domain reform. The reveal here is that this isn't just some abstract legal battle. It's a direct threat to the sanctity of private property that could touch anyone, anywhere, if these legal precedents aren't challenged now. So what this all comes down to is a critical and often unseen pressure point on private property rights. The seemingly benign expansion of our digital infrastructure, the very backbone of our AI future, is clashing directly with individual ownership. When utility companies, backed by the legal power of eminent domain, can redefine public use to include powering a private data center, it sets a chilling precedent for what could be considered justifiable seizure. Have you ever had a utility company try to acquire a right-of-way on your property? Or have you seen a new substation go up in your community? Share your experience in the comments below. If you want to keep understanding the hidden mechanisms shaping our economy and technology, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you're curious about how these massive tech expansions are also impacting our energy grid, then my breakdown of the coming power crisis for AI data centers is exactly the next thing you should watch.